Hi, everybody. Welcome back one more time. I can't believe we're pretty much at the end here. This is our last sort of official video day. So I just want to cover a couple more topics. We're almost done here. So I just want to take a little bit of a look around the world at some of the places that we missed. So the end of our class is sort of the end of ancient history, basically. And you can put that in arbitrary places. Some people would put the end of ancientness at the end of the medieval period. Others would put it before the medieval period. In our class, we're roughly going to up to the year 1000 in Europe. But in other parts of the world, you have developments that are going on at the same time, including in Africa and in North and South America. We just don't know of them in as much detail during those time periods as we know of them in time periods like the 1400s, when Europeans come into contact with those cultures. But I want to make sure that we give them at least a little space here at the end. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. There's a lot more that we'd like to know. And also some of the needs of this class is just to focus on specific things, specific historical events, hit the high points. But I don't want to leave these parts of the world out completely either. Like we said, during the European Middle Ages, what was going on in Europe didn't necessarily have to affect the rest of the world. And while arguably Europe was in a bit of a point where it was not growing as much as it had been before, it was still growing. We should remember that. And in other parts of the world, they were growing at the same rate or faster. And in Africa, for instance, things were growing. So if you look at this map here, you see the parts of northern Africa that we saw previously as part of the Roman Empire, now run by the caliphates. And you also see some major points along the map here that show that there were indeed different empires in Africa as well. And we're not just talking about, we know that these cultures were there. We're talking about kingdoms and all that sort of city building stuff that historians like to geek out over. This kind of more concrete evidence that gives us more to work with to understand these cultures. So if you look at Africa, there are different regions in Africa where things were going on. The ones I want to focus the most on are the culture in Mali, which you can kind of see, I believe, is this green one here. Then you've got the one in Zimbabwe, which is down in southern Africa, and you've got Ethiopia over here. So Ethiopia is kind of the big one for Eastern Africa. We already have looked at Northern Africa and Egypt in the past. In Western Africa, there's quite a lot going on, as you can see, quite a lot of cultures coming into city building and sometimes taking each other over and succeeding and not succeeding with each other. Yeah, the yellow one here is the Empire of Mali, and we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at Zimbabwe and Ethiopia real quick. And this is all sort of from the time period of 500 to 1500. So contemporary with the European Middle Ages. In Mali, you've got this powerful trading empire that is basically based around connecting to all these desert trade routes. So these guys, we don't really see them in the historical record before pretty late, 1200s, 1300s, and that's AD, not or CE, not BC. But these guys have rivers down here, but they're also connected to all the trading across the desert. And the desert, you can find resources like gold and silver and incense and things like that. So there's always been a pretty notable trading network that goes through the Sahara, even though nobody really wants to live in the Sahara. And that's what Mali is all about. And so they've got a pretty good gig, and so they kind of dominate Western Africa for quite a while there. Now they learn about Islam and they become part of the Muslim world. They convert to Islam. And there's one king of the Mali Empire who is pretty famous. This is a guy named Mansa Musa. So Mansa Musa kind of goes on tour of the rest of the world. He goes through Africa and he goes through what we would now call the Middle East. And he's going on tour in part because he's going on a pilgrimage to Mecca, because like a good Muslim, he wants to visit the holy site of that religion. But he's also kind of showing off his own power. So he's showing his gold and he's spending lavishly. And the Muslim writers write a lot about him because they're very impressed by him. And the story goes that he spent so much money that gold became kind of worthless for a little while in the caliphates after that, because nobody needed it anymore. So yeah, that's how he is remembered in the historical record. And there are even some records of him in Christian sources as well, because he made quite a big splash, this Mansa Musa guy. Another notable African empire is the Empire of Ethiopia, also known as Aksum or Abyssinia, if you've ever heard those words. Now that empire, really a kingdom more like, it doesn't take over in the same way that the Romans do, but Ethiopia is notable because it converts to Christianity and it stays Christian even while the rest of Africa is staying pretty Muslim. And it's pretty isolated from other places like Egypt and whatnot. You can see on the map here. You know, it's kind of far away from everything else. So that's a good reason why it would kind of keep its own traditional culture. But to this day, the Ethiopians have a form of Christianity that's different from a lot of other forms of Christianity out there, and has its own ideas and its own theology. And their kingdom, their Christian kingdom, has lasted since the 300s, basically since around the time that Constantine was thinking about making the Roman Empire be Christian. So they, you know, an interesting group of people. And they say that they have the Ark of the Covenant, which is kind of fun. Indiana Jones doesn't have it. According to them, they have it. They won't let anyone see it, though. But they claim to have it. It seems like some Christians did get word about Ethiopia or Abyssinia because they got this story going about, in a faraway land, there's a magical king who is this glorious Christian king. He's surrounded by Muslims on every side, but he is a heroic Christian who's going to come and save us, and he's going to help us in the Crusades, take back the Holy Land. And they call this guy Prester John, which means something like John the Priest. And so the idea was that John the Priest, he had a magical kingdom, and he ruled over all these magical creatures and things, and he had the Fountain of Youth and all this cool stuff. So it was a fun story, although they weren't quite sure where he was. They thought maybe India somewhere, but probably the inspiration was Ethiopia, that there really was this kind of isolated Christian kingdom out there. But yeah, Prester John, he's kind of like a hoax or an urban legend in medieval times. So it's interesting to see the influence that this kingdom had. And finally, for African empires, I definitely want to make sure I mention Zimbabwe. So that's down in southern Africa. And I wish we had more of Zimbabwe. A lot of its ruins were destroyed by Europeans when they took over South Africa and the country that is today called Zimbabwe. But they were quite significant city builders in the same way that anybody like India, the Indus Valley Civilization, or the Greeks, or the early Mesopotamians, they were, again, building cities for themselves with pretty significant walls, which suggests, you know, going to war with other cultures. They also did a lot of work with ebony, this beautiful kind of dark wood. And so we have some of their artifacts too. But they are pretty noteworthy. And again, they were going pretty strong until the 1400s when Europeans started coming around. So it wasn't so much that they weren't able to, it's not so much that Africa, you know, some people might think that it never had any cultural development or city building or anything like that. In fact, in a lot of places, it did. It's just that a lot of that was wiped out and destroyed later on. So that's important to keep in mind. And as much as we haven't focused on these, I do want to mention them and make sure that we know about them, just for the sake of, you know, having an understanding of things outside the context of Europe. And Mansa Musa in particular would be really good to remember, coming from the kingdom of Ethiopia, because he kind of made a big splash. Sorry, he's not from Ethiopia. He's from Mali. So I guess Mansa Musa is from Mali, and Ethiopia is notable for its somewhat unique Christian culture. Not to mislead you here. Okay, so that's going to be our quick little tour of Africa. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about what's been going on in the Americas, because we need to catch up with the Olmecs and the Norte Chico civilization, see what those cultures have evolved into. All right, see you in that one.